Cisco Firepower Threat Defense, some firepower differences, next-gen IPS, file a malware, and application. So we're going to go through a couple of things and really showing the differentiation in firepower threat defense. So IPS, network discovery, host and vulnerabilities, advanced malware, and application visibility and control, including OpenAppID. When we look at IPS, we're going to look at rules and firepower recommendations, variable sets, network discoveries, and host and vulnerabilities. So here we go. The first thing we're going to do is, this is the dashboard, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to access control and intrusion. And I did not do this in any specific order. I just really focused on some core areas to highlight some of the major differences. So you can see this is a fairly complicated intrusion policy, right? Lots of different policy sets already created. In our case, we're going to create a brand new one. And we'll give it a name. And you can give it a description. You can see here it's drop when inline. And we've got a couple of base policies right out of the gate. There's some extra ones here, but the base policies balance security and connectivity. So a little bit of both. Connectivity over security, obviously leaning towards connectivity before security, and then security over connectivity, okay, favoring security itself. Now, most environments start with balanced security and connectivity, and then they tune from there. Again, you will leverage the base policy in your environment that matches whatever outcome that you're trying to achieve. So we're going to create an edit policy here. So we can see that it's drop when inline's checked. If that was unchecked, that would be more like an IDS. Right? We've got the base policies, and then here's the policy that breaks out how many rules are generate events and how many rules are set to drop and generate events out of the gate. And very quickly, you can see, you can pivot around the rule set very, very easily. All of this can be leveraged as needed, right? So you can very quickly pivot to a specific Microsoft vulnerability, for example, or platform specific, or you can look for things like malware, right? And it's very easy to pivot. You can also create your own signatures, right? And modify existing signatures. Nothing's limiting you in regards to full next generation IPS capabilities. And here we just enabled a rule. Now, the biggest challenge with anything is tuning the IPS. And we have a capability called firepower recommendations. So because we learn the environment, we have the ability to make recommendations on what you should leverage. Now there I could have examined a specific network and I could set the rule recommendation threshold, right? By rule overhead, we'll leave it at medium. And we can accept the recommendations to disable rules. Okay, in our case, we're just going to generate recommendations at this stage. You could generate and use recommendations, but in our case, we want to look at some of those rules, right? So it's going out and understanding what we have in our environment from an IPS perspective, also with our understanding of the environment itself, right? And we're going to talk more about some of the host discovery stuff that we can do. And now it provides us some insight into what the recommendations is. And you can do this manually like we did here, but you can also schedule this or be part of the change management process, right? After a new service lit up. So we can see 18,000 rule states for 3,000 plus hosts, 176 rules to generate events, 6,000 to drop and generate events, and about 12,000 rules disabled. Now this is huge, right? 12,000 rules have no relevance for your organization. Talk about power, right? Let's get rid of the noise so we can focus on things that matter to us. Now here what I did was I wanted to have a quick look at some of those rules that we're going to change. So here's the recommendations here. And again, here's a summary of that, right? So pretty cool. But we didn't say use recommendations. So now I could come back once I'm comfortable. I can come in and say use recommendations, and it's going to go out. It's going to take a minute, right? But it's going to go out and it's going to set the policy to use those recommendations. Again, nothing's happening yet until we hit commit and we deploy those changes, right? So now we've committed the changes. So now we've got this for a lack of better term, an advanced object that we can now use an access control policy to leverage the layer 7 type inspection, right, in IPS itself. So let's commit this. And now we can see here's that rule that we just created. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, this rule's not actually being leveraged yet until we actually come in and apply it to an access control policy. So let's create a new one here. We'll just give it a name, and then you can add your devices at this stage. I'm not going to add any devices. Again, I'm just showcasing some of the capabilities here. And now we'll add a rule. Now, give it a name. In this case, we're going to call it Threat Inspection. And we're going to do internal to external using zones. Now, there's a lot of attributes here. You don't need to leverage them all. All you need to do is leverage what is required to make the flow unique, right? So that way we can make sure that we have a match and then the inspection. So we got VLAN tags. If Active Directory integration or ICE was included, you have the ability to use identity that way. You can see here applications. We're going to get into this a little bit later, but you can see user created filters, etc. Right? Very powerful. We have ports, right? Because we let you do and build policy as you see fit. URLs, right? And you can see all the categories here and reputations. Security group tags, right? If you want to integrate with ICE. And this is where we can add, because this is an allow policy, we have the ability to add additional inspection, right? If it was a block policy, well, there's no additional inspection, right? And once we hit a match, we're going to block it. In our case, we're going to add the webinar FP IPS. Again, you can log, in this case, at end of connection probably makes the most sense. But you don't have to in order to get alerts, right? Alerts are still going to be generated for security intelligence, IPS and malware type events. Connection logging is obviously over and above that. So use it where required. And then you save this out, and then you could, deploy this to your device, right? So pretty easy, especially the tuning capability of the platform, right? And that's always been a challenge with IPS, is really going back and being able to tune. Now, variable sets are very important, right? Variable sets give us an understanding of the environment, right? And therefore, if we understand the environment, if we're protecting them, then we've got a better sense of what that device is, right? So at minimum, you want to come in and adjust the home network variable set, right? And you can see there's a lot of them here, right? There's DNS servers, HTTP servers, FTP ports. Again, come in here. The more that you fill in, the better, right? But the home net, we want to certainly leverage an object that we may have created, or we use some that are already created for us by default, right? In most cases, you'll create your own network objects. You can do it from this screen or the network tab on the left. And then you just assign, right? So if, for example, you'd add, DNS servers to obviously the DNS servers variable set. And again, this is just an example. And you can see all the options here, right? Telnet servers, SSH servers, ports, etc. Now, that's if we use the default variable set. A good idea would be is leave the default set as is and maybe modify a new variable set, right? So create one. That way you always have the default and you can leverage the insight into what default is. Now, when we make a change here, what you're going to see is that it's actually going to show up at the top section of it. So here we're going to, home net, we're going create a inside network. This is an object that I said that you can create within the page itself. And go ahead and save that off. And now we have that object available to us, right? I could have done it up there in network objects as well. So we can search from here. Inside network, include, and save. Now you'll see that variable set moved up to customized variables, right? Things that we've modified. And now I don't see it listed here, and that's because I actually have to come out and then back in. Right? If I was just modifying the default set when I pivot from that screen, that would be fine. But because I went and created a new one and I want to assign it to this policy, I'll have to actually go out and back in to grab it. So we save that out, and then we save the policy, and then again, deploy as required, right? So what I'm going to do here is because this environment has multi domains within Firepower Management Center. So it's just a way of carving up multiple domains within the environment that may be under certain administrative control. But here nor there, right? I've come in and I'm going to create what we call a network discovery policy, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to discover hosts, users, and applications for the inside network. Right? I can use zones here to be a little more granular, and I could do some port exclusions as well. Now, what this is going to allow us to do is understand the operating systems and applications that are on the assets as well as users, right? And here with the users traffic-based detection allows us to pull user identity out of these clear text type protocols, right? And capture banner, this will allow us to do things like capture the Apache banner, right? So we know what version of Apache it is. The idea here is that we have an understanding of the asset we're protecting, and therefore we can now provide you understanding of the impact when a signature fires, right? So and we'll talk a little bit more about impact, but if an attack comes in and it's for Apache and the server's running IIS, I may not care as much, right? And here I'm just pivoting again between the domains just to show content. So here you can see a couple of devices that have been profiled. That's the blue. Red means indication of compromised asset, and gray means that we haven't profiled it. Now this is pretty valuable when you're looking at mitigating risk, right? The last thing you want your analyst to do is have to go back and validate whether or not the threat would be realized. So by giving it an impact score and profiling the environment gives us better insight. So you can see the user that's logged in, you can see the intrusion of compromise, we can pivot to that last seen or first seen event. We can see services that are running, applications. We've got user history too, right? When people have logged into the system. We can see host protocols. We can do attributes on it. We have whitelist violations and vulnerabilities. Now, the cool thing with vulnerabilities is we passively identify this. And here we've got lots of vulnerabilities that have been associated to this host profile at this time. And I can go in and learn about this particular vulnerability, right? So some of this has a lot of content, some has a little less, right? Depending on the vulnerability. But it gives me a description, a technical description, and then the solution. And sometimes we'll have additional information. Now this is key. These are things that you can fill into a report when you're have an incident, right? Or how you're mitigating risk. You know, there's a lot of copy and paste here. Mitigation description, effective description, ease of exploit. And here's the actual patches to remediate the issue, right? You can download them and then give them the help desk and they can push this out to your user base. So pretty powerful. So you can see some geolocation information there, initiator, responder, countries. Vulnerabilities, I had mentioned earlier that we do this passively. So we look at all kinds of things as it traverses the next-gen platform, right? Firewall or IPS. and we're able to determine pretty accurately what the asset is that we're trying to protect. And therefore, we can pull the vulnerabilities for that asset and tie it to it. But we can also integrate with third-party real-time vulnerability scanners, right? That can actually go out and invoke a vulnerability scan and give us real-time information and update that host profile with real-time understanding of the vulnerabilities. We can do things like initiate an Nmap scan as well. So more than, a traditional, what I would say more of a traditional next-gen firewall, right? This has got some additional advanced capabilities. For instance, look at the network mapping, right? So I can come in here and I can put a MAC address, an IP address, and do a quick search and find an IP if there's tens of thousands or thousands even, right? Like I can come in here and do a quick check. And now I can see here's 10.1, get an idea. We're looking at Microsoft at this point in time. We don't know how long it's been since it's been profiled. And this one's got some Linux discovery on it at this point in time. We can see some applications, host protocols, and then we can very quickly do a search, right? Just put in the IP address and look at that host specifically. And then you can see some other tabs here, right? We try to identify it as a network device, as a mobile device, indications of compromise, applications, vulnerabilities, and host attributes that might be associated. The other thing we can do is we can leverage the platform to understand, right? You saw the vulnerabilities piece. Well, vulnerability will allow us to understand the vulnerability. We can understand what steps we can use to mitigate it. But here I'm using geolocation to do a lookup. I don't have to go to another tool to do this, right? I can do it right from here. Maybe I want to look up a couple URLs, right, to see how they fit from a category perspective, but as well as a reputational perspective. And you can see malware, or in this case, adult, right? And then I can also come in and do who is, right? Again, I just pick a random IP that happens to be on maybe a bad list, right? A malware domain list, etc. Or it could be a good IP. It doesn't really matter. You can do this within the platform in other areas too, just by right-clicking the IP and say who is. But I can see, the country of origin in this case is Russia, right? That could be good. That could be bad. But at least I've got some insight or additional insight without having to go and use multiple tools. Now, when I come in and look at events, I can see this. This is the default view, and you can change that. But table events will break this up a little bit nicer, at least in my use case, right? So now I have an understanding of impact. Now, this is where that host discovery comes in, right? I have the ability to now say whether or not something matches something from an intrusion perspective. So if you look at impact 1, act immediately, it's vulnerable. Event corresponds to vulnerability that we've mapped to the host itself. 2 is investigate potentially vulnerable. So relevant port open or protocol in use, but no vuln or vulnerability mapped, right? Impact 3, good to know, currently not vulnerable, relevant port not open or protocol not in use. Impact 4, good to know, unknown target, monitored network, but unknown host. So we're actually monitoring the network itself. 0 is good to know, unknown network. So this is unknown network at this point, and we probably want to figure out why we're not actually monitoring that network. But pretty powerful, right? We're actually now allowing you to focus on things that matter, right? And you can see some geolocation information. If I didn't know what a specific rule that was fired was all about, I can do that right from here. And I can do things like drop and generate events or disable the rule or suppressions and thresholding. But here, what I want to do is just understand the rule, right? So I can see the rule documentation. Now, some of this has got a lot of data in it, right? With multiple references, whether that's bug track, etc. Microsoft, for example. And we can pivot right from there as well. But at least I have a good understanding as opposed to just a message, right? So other areas of interest, right, where, maybe impact comes into play. So if we go over to intrusion events, we can see here we've got it broken down, right? So we see 54,253 have been dropped, and 54,696, if I said that correctly, is what we've seen overall. And then this is the breakdown between the impacts. So as an analyst, I would certainly be interested in impact ones, right? And so what I would want to do is maybe pivot from here, right from the dashboard into it. And we can see on the left side, you can things like top attackers, right? You've got just under that top targets, and under that we've got dropped intrusion events, right? So we can see 2 impact ones, and then you've got a priority. Here's got medium and low. Again, just help you focus your efforts. In this case, it could be 88 count. You can see that on the right side, 1 host or 88 hosts or a combination. So let's look at both of these for a second. We can also do something interesting. We can download the packet here and throw it up into Wireshark if we wanted to. But I'm going to show you we can do this actually in a browser as well. So we can see, first thing we can see is it's inline and it was dropped, right? So that's good to know. We can see some flags of red assets under destination IP that show indication of compromise. So pretty cool stuff, right? And we're going to come back to more of that as we go along. Let's talk about advanced malware, and we'll do some look at retrospection, file trajectory, and obviously a policy build. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we go to access control malware policies, as you see here, and then we'll go to new file policy, and we're going to create one right from scratch. And you can see there's a couple others already pre-created for other uses, right? They may be assigned to next-gen firewalls or next-gen IPSs. They may not be. And then here we're going to add a rule. Now, we can detect files, block files, malware lookup. We'll talk more about that in a second. But look at all the different protocols. So again, you want to be as granular as possible without being crazy, right? So you can see HTTP has upload, download, right? But if I went to IMAP, the only option would be download. So you can actually be very granular in how you're doing your inspections. In this case, let's say we're going to do, maybe we're going to look at something like detect files, and maybe we'll do it for maybe FTP, and maybe we only care about uploading. So we've got an FTP server somewhere that we only want folks from the internal network going external to be able to upload, but we want to detect certain file types that are going up. Now we could say in this case we're going to block, right? So what we're saying here is that if you put system files or multimedia content on this FTP server, we're going to block this, right? Now, detect is just going to let you know about it. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to block malware, right? So Spiro analysis is actually machine learning for executables. We have dynamic analysis. This is our outside looking in sandboxing capability. We have capacity handling. So if any reason we can't get or send that file up, we will the moment we get that connection back. We have local malware analysis, which is high fidelity signatures on box, and then we can reset that connection. Now, we have an option to store files. Maybe in this case, I want to keep all malware and unknown files. And maybe I want to look at Office documents, PDFs, maybe anything that's dynamic analysis capable, as well as local malware analysis capable, and maybe executables as well. Again, you'll pick what is interesting in your environment, and we'll throw in archives, right? We'll save this out, and just so you know, the most restrictive rule applies here. Now, if we go to advanced, there's some additional settings. So you can actually turn on and inspect archives. You can block encrypted archives. You can block inspectable archives. And then you can go 3 levels deep with an archive, which is actually 4 levels because the first level doesn't actually count. And you can save this out. Just like in IPS, it's not doing anything yet, right? We've got to go to an access control policy, and we've got to build that out. Now, don't worry if you've been keeping score here and you're thinking, well, what happened to the original policy? I've broken this out into different pieces. So the policy from the first video may not be part of this piece, right? So the idea is just to kind of show you how to associate those policies. So here we'd add a rule, right? Just like we've seen before. We've got the same attributes as we've seen before. Maybe this is internal to external, right? We could say any IP address. We can create an object from here. Let's give it a name, threat inspection. Right? We can grab applications, ports, etc. But in this case, we're just doing a fairly wide open policy here and just inspect file policy. We could include intrusion here as well, right? And again, we can log at beginning or end of connection typically when it's an allow policy. Or we can optimize, right, and not have logging on at end of connection or even at beginning of connection unless we need it, right? So we went to analysis, files, malware events, and now we're going to look at some of the analysis around malware itself. Now you could also look at files, right, what we're detecting, but in this case, I really want to show you the capabilities of network file trajectory, right? It's pretty powerful. Imagine having this visibility. So here's the events at the bottom here. You can see transfer, block, create, scan, retrospective, and quarantine. So if you had endpoint amp, it ties in. But retrospective is pretty powerful, right? So point-in-time detections, like next-gen firewalls, antivirus, IPSs, and sandboxing, at a certain point in time, they make a decision. And this decision is whether it's clean, unknown, or malware, right? In this case, let's assume that they take the clean position, right? Because they can't stop the environment from operating. And the file is marked clean, maybe unknown, but sleeping techniques, unknown protocols, encryption, polymorphism, lateral movement all come into play here, right? The adversary knows how to get around some of this technology, right? And when it gets into the environment, now we're blind, right? We don't know where it is. We have no idea, right? Actually, most platforms won't even tell you it ever happened. They'll only tell you about any net new infection once they have the capability. So the difference with Cisco Firepower is that we do this continuous analysis. So even we do the same thing at that, what we call the event horizon. We make that decision. And if it is clean and we let it in, or unknown, for example, we continually analyze that, right? We get feeds that come in, and at any point that disposition changes, we can then mark it as bad, but we'll tell you when the moment that file came in, not when we know that it's bad. So we actually go back in time and tell you exactly who got impacted and when. And that way now I have an understanding of the scope, right? And now I can start working on containment and mitigating risk overall. So it's a pretty powerful capability within the platform, right? We don't leave you hanging. Everybody's trying to do 100% prevention, right? Everybody in the industry. And we can argue who's better. At the end of the day, every product has or will miss something. And you want to have capabilities to mitigate that very quickly and understand what actually happened. So you can see the dispositions at the bottom. We come up, we see the SHA-256. We can analyze the file by manually sending it up if we needed to. And when I say up, I mean to the cloud for sandboxing. There was the file composition, right? So we get some insight into that. And here's some things people don't know about that threat score. If I click those buttons here, I actually get the dynamic analysis, right? What actually happened in Threat Grid. And I can see how it was ranked and why, right? Gives me some insight. Now, I can also go into View Report. So this will actually show me the Threat Grid report that did the outside looking in sandboxing of that file. So I can see the behavioral indicators, right? It breaks it out. It gives me a good understanding of what that behavioral indicator is. And I think we're well over 900 or maybe 1,000 behavioral indicators today. You can see DNS traffic, TCP/IP streams, all the processes that were invoked during that time, any artifacts, right, that were associated. You can see macro.vbs here. right? You can see excel.exe. So these are all things that were used during the execution of that file. As we go down, you see registry activity, created keys, deleted keys, modified keys, right? And then you also have file system activity. Now, you're not going to be in here all the time, right? You're not going to be doing this deep analysis every day. But when you need to, it's there. All the details are there for you to get a good understanding. Now, file trajectory allows me to see what's happening over the network. So I can see users associated with it, right? I can see the asset and the user. And the indication of compromise is also associated with the user, right? I can see 88 event counts. I can see where it's being 57 hosts and the breakdown between senders and receivers, right? Here I can see the arrows, and it shows me the relationships between the assets and how the file may have propagated within the environment itself, right? As long as we can see the flow, we can associate that. Now, if we had endpoint app and this was a retrospective event, we would actually show you the quarantined icon that we actually quarantined it. And you can see here, HTTP web browser, I can now pivot to that host, right? I can see threat detected and file transfer. That's pretty interesting. Wouldn't it be nice to see file executed on endpoint? And that's what endpoint amp would do if you had that included as part of the solution set. And again, user history, but we already seen that, right? So applications, right? So we can do custom applications. So OpenAppID, and this is something that was powerful. Cisco introduced a couple years ago, released it to the open source community, specifically Snort. And OpenAppID allows us to be able to build signatures. Anybody can build signatures, right? It's not proprietary. It's an open rules language. And now you can come in and build applications on your own. And you can do it right from the platform itself. So we see here, we've got applications, right? We can change, modify this, change the colors. There's tons of tables that you can reference. You can see traffic by applications, right? So total bytes, traffic by application category. We've got risks, denied connection by applications. And we can see intrusion events, right, that are associated to certain applications. Again, I could very quickly pivot to any one of these. Impact 2, impact 0. Remember, those impacts are going through and letting us understand where we should be focusing our efforts. So these are dropped events, but say I wanted to know a little bit more about that SNMP event. So I can see here, there's quite a bit, and this is obviously a demo environment. And they're medium. And again, I could download the packet, or I can view this one specific alert, or I can do all of them, right? It doesn't really matter. And here's some of the impact scoring now when I'm starting to zoom in a little bit more on it. I can see it was dropped in line. I can see the relationships between geolocations. I can see, here's the application protocol, right? If the user identity was there, I would have that as well. Now let's go into access control policy. And what we'll do is let's edit this policy. And what we'll do is maybe we'll create a rule and just show you what a base rule would look like in case that you've never seen the product before, or maybe you have, but you haven't deployed any application control. So again, actions very similar, right? You can allow, you can trust, you can monitor, you can, block. Obviously, you can do interactive block, etc. So we're going to do block with reset. We're going to look at peer-to-peer type activity. Again, we can come in here, and if we wanted to, we can do it based on geolocation, right? So we can say, you know what, the destination is maybe some of these countries, maybe, right? Or source. Applications, right? That's what we're really focused on in this particular piece. So you can see these are user-created filters. So you can actually bundle a bunch of applications into something meaningful. You can see risks. I can focus on very high risk applications. Business relevance, right? What is typically of value to the business versus not so valuable. you can see all these different categories, right? Active Directory now, right? So it breaks out some of the application or Active Directory type applications. But we're really focused on peer-to-peer here. And you can see right away, I can grab this entire group and I can see all of these applications, add it over, and again, block with reset. I might want to do some intrusion or file policy, but since it's a block policy, those options aren't available, right? We're blocking it right away. And log at beginning of connection is only available because there is no end of connection because we're blocking it. Placement of the rule is always important. And you can see here categories peer-to-peer. So just a quick summary of what we've got here. So any matching peer-to-peer type application, we're going to block it, right? Now I could come back in here and add, if I was that bottom policy, I could add, maybe additional IPS. I just want to show you could put IPS and malware together, right? And you can save that out. And then, of course, you would deploy, right? Just like before. And then you've got security intelligence feeds that you can also apply here. But let's go to objects and let's do a little bit more with applications. Again, I'm trying to include as much as possible within, 50 minutes or less, right? So let's add an application filter. This is what I was showing you earlier. So I can actually come in here and create a filter and then group certain applications together. Now this could be based on, maybe categories, or it could be individual applications. It could be custom applications if I decided to do that. So for our use case, let's say peer-to-peer, but maybe now we might want something else here, right? So you can see there's lots of categories here. You might want to say bad applications are things like remote desktop control from an external to internal source, maybe, right? In our case, let's just grab something like, let's see here. Maybe let's do anonymizer and proxy. And we'll add that to the rule, right? Again, I could be very selective if I wanted to. So now I have an application filter. We'll come back and I'll close the loop on that to show you how to leverage that, just in case you were wondering. Let's go to policies and application detectors. So this is where we can create a custom detector. So here we give it a name. And you can see the little red exclamation marks, and you got something wrong here. And then application protocol. So you can pick something that already exists. You can see there's a fairly large list of them here. Or you can add one, right? So if you have an in-house application. So let me just zoom in a little bit here just to make sure that we understand some of the options here. So the first thing is we can see that you've got a name and you've got a description, but business relevance. So how relevant is to the business. So if you're doing a custom app, most likely it'll be high or very high. And then the risk, right, would be low or very low if it was a custom internal application. We could do it based on categories, right? So here we assign, say, business, right? And then we can associate tags to it as well. So going back to our example, now I don't have a custom application. The idea is just to show you the capabilities here. So again, in my case, maybe this application's high from a business relevance perspective. Maybe I have even very high applications, so I want to score this one appropriately. And then categories, I'm going to grab business because that's what it is, right? And then tags, you can see here, there's a tremendous amount of tags available. So in this case, I'm not going to grab any tags, but you get the idea, right? In order to move forward here, though, we've got to give it a name and we've got to give it a description. And you can see the red box letting you know that something's not right. And then we say okay. And here it just gives you a warning that when you're playing around with some of these custom applications that there might be impact to the environment from a snort process restart perspective. So just make sure that you understand what you're doing here with that message. And then if there is something that may impact the environment, that you schedule that change. So here we've got that application protocol created. Now we can grab that. And you've got detector type. So we're really going to focus on basic. We'll give this a description. And then we'll select OK. And this is going to bring up the actual detector information that we need to fill in. And there's two pieces to this, right? So the first one is detection pattern. So you've got multiple protocols to choose from. TCP, UDP, HTTP, SSL, SIP, RTMP. Right? And depending on that, you'll get a certain type. In this case, because it's TCP, we have ASCII and hex, right? Or hex, sorry, to choose from. And then we create a pattern, right? And that pattern might be, in this case, it's ASCII. It's going to be welcome to custom application as a connection response, right? We can also include the offset from the beginning of the packet. So we can say from this portion at the start of the packet, this deep, this is when you should see this pattern. Right, so you can get fairly advanced as well. And you can see directions, client or server. And then packet capture, it allows you to browse and actually insert a packet that'll actually simulate the traffic to determine whether the detector actually identified the application. So you would do a fairly clean packet capture of your application, and then you would save that out. You would then insert it here, and then you'd run it to make sure that your actual detector is capturing that application correctly. So here we are, right? Again, I'm not going to make any changes here. I'm just going to show you how to get it started, right? And then go from here. And then again, you would browse to that packet capture to simulate the traffic to determine whether your patterns were actually working or not. Now you would save this out. Now, it's one of the bigger things that people miss or can miss is that you don't actually enable it, right? So make sure that you come in. If you need to use search or filter to find your application and then turn it on or enable it. So in our case, we called it, I think, my app or my application. So let's search something starting with my, and there it is, my application right there. And you can see it's not enabled, right? Just because you created it doesn't enable it. And again, here it's just reminding you that there could be impact, right? So understand the risk and then schedule accordingly if required. All right, so now it's time to get this applied to a policy. So let's go back, and the first thing we're going to do is edit the that block P2P, and you know, maybe we'll change it to be that application filter that we created. So let's go through here. There it is there, webinar bad applications. And then you probably change the name as well, right? Not block peer-to-peer, but block bad applications. And now let's create another rule that will actually leverage the business application. So this will be an allow policy. And, you know, maybe it's production to DMZ, for example. And now we can come in and search for our application. And my app right there. We can also see any of the settings that we set. And we can add to rule. We could modify the inspection here. So we could add intrusion and malware policy if we wanted to, because it is an allow policy, and we'll log at end of connection. We'll do it above maybe the other rules that we have in place there, right? To make sure that we do get a match. And now we can see all business apps, production to DMZ, my app, allow, and we've got a intrusion policy, and we've got the block P2P, which should be bad applications, but you guys get the idea. And save that out. Now, I just want to go back over to search. So say, for example, you are looking at an intrusion event, and you're maybe looking at a specific application. So you got all kinds of search criteria here, right? There's no shortage of attributes that you can leverage when searching for certain data information that you are interested in, right? So, you got application protocol, protocol category, tag, client category, client tag, web application, right? Application risk, business, relevance. In our case, we're just going to look for SSH. And we can see here, we can save this out too. So you can see on the left side, it's a little grayed out, but that's where your save searches would go. So you can, define fairly comprehensive search criteria and look at it and save it for later, right? Here we can see SSH event, payload size, medium priority, potentially bad traffic. We can see it's got a count of 1. Again, we can download the packets if we want to here. In our case, we're just going to view this event. And again, we can see it was inline dropped, but with that black arrow, we can see there's the port 22. We can see the generator, the source user, the application protocol, and actually the client as well, OpenSSH. So we can actually drill a little bit further, right? Remember earlier at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that we can actually see the packet in its raw form in a web browser. And you can do that, right? We can download the packets and you can put it in Wireshark, but you can also view it in a browser. So here we've got, event, timestamp, priority, ingress, egress, the interfaces it came in on. We can do who is. You can actually block from here as well by just right-clicking. You have some actions for rule comments or edit the rule, understanding the rule that was fired. We've got thresholding and suppression options. And you can see here's the packet in the web browser. Pretty cool stuff, right? Being able to do that without having to, flip over into Wireshark. You can be on an iPad viewing this through a secure channel and be able to look at the packet if you want to. So Cisco Firepower Next Generation Firewall, right? And we've just touched on the surface. Application visibility, OpenAppID, user identification, threat feed. You've got web filtering, right? URL categorization and reputation, next-gen IPS with lots of signatures, auto signature tuning, impact assessment. And then you got AMP with retrospective security, cloud sandboxing, and Talos intelligence. Right? We just touched the surface. There's so much more to the platform, like workflow and event correlation rules. So really powerful platform. You can integrate with DDoS on certain platforms, leveraging things like Radware. But that's it. That's all we got for 50 minutes. Hopefully you got something out of it. Again, this will be available on video. For the folks watching in the webinar, you can always check out my YouTube channel as well.